In the UFC, a title shot is supposed to be a reward, the end of a long, brutal climb up the rankings. But let's be real. Sometimes it's more about timing, name value, or just being the loudest guy in the room. Hey guys, SHAK here, and ahead of UFC 316, where some of you might feel like Sean O'Malley didn't earn this title rematch, today we're counting down 10 UFC fighters who didn't truly earn their title shots. No short notice miracles, just scheduled matchups that left fans scratching their heads and other contenders pissed off. Nick Diaz versus Georges St-Pierre, UFC 158. Nick Diaz stepped into a welterweight title fight against Georges St-Pierre in 2013, despite being suspended for a year and losing his interim title fight to Carlos Condit. Now, to be fair, many fans thought Diaz deserved the nod in a razor-close fight, and the suspension was for marijuana, so whatever. But on paper, he was coming off a loss and a layoff. Meanwhile, Johnny Hendricks was on a 5-fight winning streak, including knocking out Martin Kampmann and beating Josh Koscheck and John Fitch. Diaz's name and rivalry with GSP got him the fight, but GSP swept him on the scorecards. Steve Erceg was granted a flyweight title shot at UFC 301 after just 3 UFC fights, with his biggest win coming over Matt Schnell. Yeah, he put a gutsy performance in against Alexandre Pantoja across 5 rounds, but since that fight, Erceg was knocked out by Kai Kara-France and beaten cleanly by Brandon Moreno, highlighting how premature the title shot was. Heading into UFC 303, Khalil Rountree Jr. was riding a strong 5-fight win streak, knocking out 4 opponents along the way. Still, beating 2023 versions of Anthony Lionheart Smith and Chris Daukaus doesn't make a resume that typically earns a title shot. Now, the light heavyweight division lacks depth, but the problem is that Rountree was chosen over a higher-ranked, more deserving contender in Magomed Ankalaev, who eventually beat Pereira. Rountree started off strong, but was brutally finished by Pereira in round 4. It looked like his face was falling off. Rountree endeared himself to fans with his heart and early success, and the fight proved that Rountree was game, just not quite ready. Jose Aldo is one of the greatest to ever do it, but he was 0-1 at bantamweight, coming off a split decision loss to Marlon Moraes. With the title vacant, the UFC gave Aldo the nod. Aljamain Sterling was arguably more deserving, riding a 4-fight win streak, including a dominant submission win against Corey Sandhagen. In UFC's defense, Sterling probably couldn't have made the 1-month turnaround, and he did fight Jan for the title next. But it further highlights how odd of a choice Aldo was. The former featherweight champ was competitive early, but Jan ran away with it late. Jan brutally stopped Aldo with strikes in round 5, a round where Jan landed 113 total strikes, and Aldo landed 1. Holly Holm entered UFC 208 on a 2-fight losing skid, having been choked out by Miesha Tate and outpointed by Valentina Shevchenko. Despite that, she was selected to headline the UFC's inaugural women's featherweight title fight against Germaine de Randamie. The fight was marred by controversy, with de Randamie landing punches after the bell not once, but twice, with 0-point deductions. Holm protested the loss, but the 48-47 unanimous decision stuck, and Holm had a 3-fight losing streak. Jorge Masvidal stepped in on 6 days' notice to fight Kamaru Usman at UFC 251 and lost a clear-cut decision. The rematch at UFC 261? That was an odd decision. Masvidal didn't fight in between. No wins, but the rivalry was hot. Their feud had been brewing for a while, with both men trading barbs publicly. Masvidal argued going 5 rounds with Usman on short notice was a sign that he'd cruise by him with a full camp. Instead, Gamebred got clocked with one of the prettiest one-punch KOs in UFC history. The sweat beaming off that man's head is stuff of legend. Meanwhile, Leon Edwards, unbeaten in 9 fights, including a dominant win over Rafael dos Anjos, was passed over and would have to wait for his eventual ascension. Chael Sonnen was coming off his second loss to UFC middleweight champion Anderson Silva when he was tapped to face John Jones at light heavyweight. It started as a last-minute replacement after Dan Henderson pulled out of UFC 151. But when Jones refused the fight, the card was cancelled. This is why we're giving Sonnen the pass, despite saying off the top there'd be no short notice fights. Dana was pissed that Jones single-handedly cancelled a UFC event. This stuff does not happen. The UFC rewarded Sonnen by booking the fight anyway, this time with a full camp and a coaching gig opposite Jones on The Ultimate Fighter. Jones crushed Sonnen late in round 1, but here's the wild part. Jones broke his toe during the fight. Had the doctor stopped the fight in between rounds and ruled it a TKO injury, Sonnen was 27 seconds away from being champion in the strangest possible way. I'd like to think somewhere in the multiverse, he did. Yoel Romero was riding a 2-fight losing streak when he got a shot at Israel Adesanya's middleweight title. He'd lost close fights to Robert Whittaker and Paulo Costa, both of which were entertaining fights of the night, sure, but still losses. Because Costa was recovering from bicep surgery, Romero got the call. Unfortunately, the fight was the polar opposite of his usual chaos. Romero barely threw. Adesanya played it safe. The fight would have been forgettable if it hadn't been memorable for how bad it was. Michael Bisping finally reached the top of the mountain after knocking out Luke Rockhold, and for his first title defense, he called out Dan Henderson? Yes, the same Hendo who'd viciously knocked him out at UFC 100. But in 2016, Hendo was 46 years old and 3-6 in his last 9, with recent losses to Vitor Belfort, Daniel Cormier, and Gegard Mousasi, all of whom finished him. Still, the UFC gave Bisping his revenge opportunity in his backyard of Manchester, England. Hilariously, Henderson nearly pulled off the upset, badly knocking down the champ in rounds 1 and 2, but Bisping managed to slightly outstrike Hendo and sneak out the win. I want to hate this fight, but seeing 56-year-old Dan Henderson nearly win the UFC title twice in one night, that was pure comedy. Here's one for the old heads. Back in 1998, Frank Shamrock, brother of UFC and WWE Intercontinental Champion Ken Shamrock, was the UFC light heavyweight champ. John Lober? He was winless in his last 7 and had just lost to Jeremy Horn. So why did he, of all people, get a title shot? Simple. 2 years earlier, in a small promotion, Lober had beaten Shamrock by split decision. Shamrock wanted revenge, and the UFC gave him the platform. Shamrock dominated from bell to bell, forcing Lober to submit to strikes after 7 minutes. As far as undeserved title shots go, this one is the grandfather of them all. And here is an honorable mention. Brock Lesnar was 2-1 in pro MMA when he was granted a UFC heavyweight title shot against the legend Randy Couture. It was premature, and it definitely cashed in on Lesnar's WWE stardom. But hey, the man won, so who am I to argue? Plus, the UFC's heavyweight division was so painfully thin at the time. Whether it was legacy, matchmaking chaos, or good old marketing, these fighters got title shots without the resume to back it up. Some rose to the occasion in defeat, others completely exposed. But all of them made us question UFC's matchmaking. Who do you think had the most undeserved title shot in UFC history, and how do you feel about Sean O'Malley getting an immediate rematch against Merab Dvalishvili at UFC 316? Drop your picks in the comments, and if you like this departure from the normal content we do, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more interviews and top 10 lists.